days worth of work, it's compressed into basically 2.
Oh, right. Yeah, you mentioned that.
I don't know, just psychologically, anytime you're meeting a bunch of people for work, it's like,
Most days.
ordinances and stuff like
Keep
that.
you busy tonight.
Good evening. Tonight is Monday, April 25th, 2022, and I'll call to order the City of Gahanna Committee of the Whole for evening. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda tonight? Okay, hearing none. Under item B, number 1, we have an update from the Department of Finance, a 2022 first quarter report. Director Burry?
He's gonna come up. Yeah, there it is.
Good evening. So I have the first quarter report to go through. Let's see if is this too small? Maybe let that up a little bit.
And it's too small when it's on
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to start off talking about the general fund. So looking at general fund revenue, first compared to the budget, We're at about 28% of what is planned, which would be expected at the end of the first quarter. Just a couple things to note. Income taxes we're tracking just as we would expect, and then we'll go over a little bit more information about income tax further on in the report. For property taxes, they're received in two distributions, the first quarter and the third quarter, about half each time. So we're right where we should be there, about 49%. For other taxes, this represents lodging tax. We're at about 16% of planned, and I went back and looked at pre-pandemic activity, and we're kind of tracking right in how first quarters were previous to the pandemic. So it looks like we have, that's continuing to recover. We have a unique situation with other revenue. So if you remember back in 2019, there was authorized an AEP EV charging station reimbursement program. So this represents the reimbursement to the city for the installation of all those EV stations in various locations in the city. License and permits are up about 47% of planned, and it's all just related to construction permits during the first quarter. As we look at how revenue tracked compared to 2021, we have an increase of about 16% or a little over $1 million. Most of that's related to income tax. Some other items are fines and fees. They increased by about 97%. This is related to a movement of the public service, general services division back to the general fund. If you remember in 2021, all those special funds had accumulated quite a large on-reserve balance. So during the 2021 budget, our policy is to use those restricted balances first. So we had the opportunity to move some activities over there in 2021 to draw down some of those restricted resources. As we moved into 2022, things were more normalized in 2021. So this is moving that division back into the general fund. We have charges for services with an increase of about 23%. This is related to the mayor's court. As you recall, we do provide services for the new Albany mayor's court. So this represents the collection of the first invoices from the fourth quarter of 2021. Other taxes are almost double, again, continuing to recover in the hospitality industry. Interest and investment income, it's expected to increase for 2021. Were some increase in rates, however, it didn't occur until mid-March. So we're down compared to the first quarter of 2021. But as investments mature and they're reinvested at those higher yielding investments, we should see that 2022 investment income exceed our 2021 levels. Again, other revenue is EV charging stations, and licenses and permits are all related to construction within the city. As we look at general fund expenditures, first looking at how we're doing compared to our plan, we're about 20%. So we're about where we expect to be at the end of the first quarter. In comparison to 2021, we're up about 15% or $775,000. A big part of that is salaries and benefits, up by about $310,000 or 9%. There are a couple things that are driving this. So if you recall in 2021, the presentation that was given on the salary study, and we elected to incorporate a portion of the results from that salary study into the 2022 budget. We also had cost of living increases for those who weren't impacted by the salary study. Again, that movement of the general services division for public service back into the general fund. And then compared to the first quarter of 2021, going into that first quarter, we were still uncertain about a lot of things associated with the pandemic, still had a lot of vacancies and some new positions that we didn't bring on board. So with the first quarter of 2022, we obviously don't have as many vacancies or unfilled positions. Some other items that are driving expenditure increases are materials and supplies. It's partially an overall increase in the costs due to inflation, as well as that rollback of the General Services Division back to the general fund. For contract services, up about $310,000. Very similar to materials and supplies, the movement of the activity, some inflation, and then we also, as you recall, with the 2022 budget, had some initiatives that we were bringing on, such as the capital improvement plan. There are others, but as far as what hit in the first quarter, those were some of the payments that we received in the first quarter. For other financing sources and uses, there's an increase, but it's just related to timing. In 2021, there was just one transfer made. We have two a year, one for the leave payout fund and the other for debt service. This year, both were just made within the first quarter. As we end the first quarter, fund balances increased about $1.3 million to 25.6 by the end of the first quarter. Of that amount, $7 million is reserved for encumbrances and 6.7 reserved for emergency. That leaves an unreserved fund balance of about $11.9 million, about 6 months of operations. As we look at the public safety fund, again, same story with revenue, tracking as we should. There is a slight decrease in charges for services, and it's just timing to how we're invoicing for the school resource officers. On the expenditure side, there's a little bit of fluctuation, and it's kind of related to a couple things. So there were two positions, the community liaison officer and a vacant school resource officer. The community liaison officer was filled in late March, and as of mid-February, we have a vacant school resource officer position. And then compared to 2021, again, it's timing a vacancy versus filling those vacancies. So for the first quarter of 2021, we were down a school resource officer. We hired or promoted or moved somebody into that position in the second quarter of 2021, again, with that becoming vacant again in mid-February of 2022. As we end the first quarter, fund balance is at about $726,000, increase of about $119,000, and of that, $4,000, a little more than $4,000 is reserved for encumbrance. Moving on to the Parks and Recreation Fund, again, revenue is about where we would plan to be. You'll notice an increase in income tax compared to 2021. There was a change in distribution based on the net operating, expected net operating activities in there. As you look at expenditures, we're only at 10% of plan, but it would be expected for the first quarter. Their season doesn't start until the second quarter going into the third quarter. So we'll see those kind of creep up as we go into the second quarter report. Ended with a fund balance of about $1.1 million, increase of about $937,000, and of that amount, $423,000 is reserved for encumbrance. Moving on to the Public Service Fund, same thing. We're about 27% of planned revenue, just where we would expect to be. Compared to 2021, revenue is down. Again, that's that activity that was reported in there in 2021, moving back to the general fund. And then you'll notice that income tax revenue is down a little bit. Again, that's just change in distribution. The expenditures are about 16% of plan. It's a little bit lower than would be expected. There's a few things. There's a couple vacant positions that have just recently been filled. So they were open through the entire first quarter. And then as far as contract services and materials and supplies, a lot of this is related to the construction season. So as we move into the second and third quarter, these costs should also start to increase. You'll also notice that compared to 2021, there was a slight increase in salaries and benefits, even though we did move some activity. So when we went through the 2022 budget, Public Service did an analysis of all the positions and identified some positions that do actually support engineering. So just the portion of their salaries are being allocated to this fund to support, as support for the engineering division. Ended with a fund balance of about 1.1 million. It's an increase about 752,000, and there's 470 reserved for encumbrance. And then finally, we have the capital improvement fund. Again, revenue's doing well, where we would expect to be. We have a slight increase in income taxes, and we'll discuss that in a moment. Expenditures are about 2% of planned. Again, it's all based on construction season and when we could actually get out there and start working on some of these capital projects. We do have an increase compared to 2021. So we had some final invoices come in for 2021 projects, and then we had more capital equipment purchasers in the first quarter of 2022 compared to 2021. Fund balance ended at 19.6 million, increase of about 1.7 million. All of it is reserved, along with what we're anticipating to bring in for the rest of the year. Following is just a list of what was approved as far as 2022 capital projects, kind of where we are with those as far as expenditures and encumbered, and what is still available. The next couple of pages are the statements that kind of support that beginning narrative. We're just going to go back by those quickly. On page 11 is a summary of all the other funds, what's been brought in to date, expended, what our fund balance is, outstanding encumbrances, and what the unencumbered balance is of all the funds. And then next is all the detail. We're not going to go through any of that. We're going to skip past the next couple of pages and go to our income tax discussion. So as we all know, income tax is our largest source of revenue, and through the end of the first quarter, it made up about 66% of general fund revenue, 99% of capital improvement fund revenue, and 83% of each of the special funds. Public safety, it represents 99%, parks and recreation, 58%, and public service, 93% of revenue. You could see the new distribution, the 1.5% to the general fund, the 75% to the capital improvement fund, which does not change, and then the public safety, public service, and parks and recreation had a little bit of an adjustment based on our planned expenditures in there for 2022. Next, looking at kind of what drove some of those increases. So we receive income tax in 3 different areas: business withholdings, individual returns, and net profits. The majority of that, or 81%, came from withholdings, followed by 12% from net profits and 7% coming from individuals. The 2 tables kind of give a breakdown of where the majority of that increase was for the first quarter of 2022 compared to 2021. Which is not a surprise. As we kind of wrapped up 2021, we saw that the majority of the increase was in net profit taxes. And it was determined that was more than likely probably an anomaly, and that we'd probably see a tilt. So net profit tax would kind of shrink, and based on economic growth, withholding tax would grow. So what we kind of predicted at the end of 2021 appears to be happening. As we look at individual taxes, those decreases were also anticipated. When the 2019 1% increase was passed, it also changed the credit from a reduced credit to 100%. So when individuals would previously file and they would have an amount due, it would create the need to file quarterly payments the subsequent year. So now when the majority of individuals are filing with that 100% credit, there's no amount due. So there's no longer these quarterly amounts that are being remitted. We still do have some unknowns. Basically, when it comes to withholding and individual tax, there's still a lot of confusion by a lot of individuals, employers, about how local income tax works. So we could see incorrect withholding may result in some refunds on that end, as well as when individuals file claiming those days in and out. So we may see refunds pick up, but until we kind of get further into the year, we won't know exactly how that's impacting us. As more information is put out about how withholding should be, I think we'll start to see some stabilization in that area. Next, looking at investments. Again, as indicated, we're expecting investment earnings to grow. I think they will as we proceed. So just kind of looking at what interest rates are doing compared to last year. So we're at about 0.6%. Star Ohio is about 0.36%. So we're earning more than we would if everything was just in Star Ohio. But good news is looking at the 2-year historical yield, if I could speak, yield curve for a 2-year maturity. 2021, we are at 0.16%. As of the end of March of 2022, we're up to 2.28%. So this is very close to what we were experiencing pre-pandemic. So a very positive indicator there, as well as the first increase in the interest rates of about 25 basis points. It's expected there'll be probably about 3 or 4 similar increases during the year. We are still keeping investment short term. As things mature, getting them reinvested, at that point determining kind of where interest rates are. Do we still continue to keep things short term, or are interest rates getting at a point where maybe we want to look at a couple more long-term type investments? So really, as we ended the first quarter, nothing really negative to report. I almost didn't know how to write it. It's been so long since we've had some stabilization and some normality. But it looks like we're on the verge of, or have already recovered. We do still have, along with most other employers, there's a struggle with recruiting and retaining human capital. But hopeful that as we continue into 2022, that'll also kind of stabilize a little bit. And again, when things first started in 2020 with the pandemic, there was no recovery expected until at least 2023. So it looks like we're a whole year earlier than what was anticipated. So now it's continue to focus on stability and growth and moving ourselves forward. So I'd be happy to take any questions anybody has.
No questions? Oh my goodness.
I know.
Well, thank you. This is looks to be like great news, and we appreciate your work on putting this together for us.
Inflation, is that going to be a huge thing?
So there's a couple things with inflation, and there's a lot of things that are impacting it. There's still the bottleneck with supplies. That'll be hopeful that'll work itself out at some point. There's also the Fed's policy that's what some of the interest rate increases are for, is to try to maybe bring some control over that inflation. But really, it's all based on policy and globalization, and there's a lot of things that are still in flux. So I think it's going to be a struggle for 2022. I think most people are hopeful that maybe come 2023 we might see that come down a little bit. But it's all just going to depend on policy and how things work out in the global markets.
Thank you.
Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Joanne. Just a couple of clarifying questions on page 28, the section that talks about investments. So the graphic there shows that, I mean, give or take, roughly 1/3 is invested in Star Ohio, and it looks like the balance being kind of individual securities. There's in the paragraph section, there's mention that, excuse me, the city's holdings, the average yield there is 60 basis points. Is that inclusive of the Star Ohio, or is that the broken out section?
That's the broken out section.
Okay. And do you happen to know by chance if both of those yields that are discussed, are those both net of fees? Just want to make sure that those are apples to apples.
I don't.
That's
know.
fine. I mean, if
Yeah.
it's just I'm just curious. I mean, we can certainly follow up by email afterwards, but there's a 24 basis point delta between the two, and I was just curious if the Star Ohio yield that's shown is what the city actually receives, and then the 60 basis points is what the city actually receives.
So
Again.
the Star Ohio, that would be correct. As
Okay.
far as the other investments that come through Red Tree.
Sure.
That's the yield to maturity, taking all of our investments into consideration, so it's weighted a little bit.
Okay. Do you know if that's net of their management fee?
So that would not, so the management fee is not incorporated into that calculation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, nothing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
All right, the next item on our agenda tonight is an update on the fair housing policy discussion. Let me go ahead and get this update. I will keep this brief. As you may remember, we had a discussion back on February 28th outlining what is fair housing policy, why does it exist, why do we need it, why is it relevant to Gahanna, and what types of legislation are we seeing around the region. There were some questions that followed that presentation and some data that was requested to be gathered. So I wanted to pull that together and put that together for my colleagues. As it so happens, April is Fair Housing Month. You can see in the link there that there is a press release from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and Ohio Housing Finance Agency has also has information related to Ohio housing discrimination as part of Fair Housing Month. So I was requested to get data a little bit more granular for our community, for the region. Thankfully, Ohio Civil Rights Commission was able to accommodate some requests, and they compiled data at the way in which that they're going to be able to compile data is by zip code. So across the entire state, for a 5-year period, there were 3,222 total OCRC housing discrimination complaints. And they are not, I do not have them broken down by type, but that is specifically related to housing. Ohio Housing Finance Agency reports that less than 2% of discriminatory incidents are reported. What this breaks out to be then is that there could be as many as 31,000 incidents of discrimination per year in Ohio if we were to take that information. You'll see that this is heat mapped as well by zip code, and you can see that Central Ohio has some of the sort of darkest, I guess, population across the state. 43215 was actually the highest reported zip code for number of complaints, with 85 complaints over the 5-year period. But that was not the only zip code. that you can tell on that map that experienced registered complaints. Of the 3 zip codes that make up Gahanna, 43230 is the largest population. Of our 36,000 residents, it's estimated that about 90% or so of our population falls within 43230. 43230 is larger than just Gahanna and does have more residents than just Gahanna. But to control for that, we also have 43004 and 43054. 43004, we have a small, I think, area of Blacklick that is in city limits, and 43054 in the upper northeast corner of the community. We have a few, some residents as well. These 3 zip codes correlate to about 0.98% of Ohio's population and 0.93% of OCRC housing complaints. So you can see that it tracks approximately consistent with the statewide data as far as per capita. These 3 zip codes also saw an increase of 50% in complaints over the 5-year time period. The region is growing, so that's not unexpected, I suppose. Said in another way, Gahanna is the 38th largest city in Ohio, and 43230 ranked 33rd in number of OCRC housing complaints. As comparison, Dublin zip code 43235 came in just above 43230 at the 32nd highest in the state for complaints. Again, we're not talking huge numbers here. You'll see combined that for 2021, 9 total complaints across the zip codes. But again, keeping in mind that 2%, it's projected that 2% of complaints are reported. We also took a good deep dive into what's going on in the region with local ordinances. I looked at 21 municipalities, all of our surrounding central Ohio communities, as well as the cities across Ohio that are similarly sized to Gahanna. So in addition to all of our neighboring communities, Bexley, Whitehall, Hilliard, Reynoldsburg, Westerville, Worthington, et cetera, we also looked at Lima, Brunswick, Mason, Ohio. So we tried to pull cities that were in that mid 30,000 population range to see what they were doing with this type of thing. As of tonight, we were able to get 19 of these municipalities' ordinances located. I have not actually been able to get Powell and Whitehall's ordinances confirmed yet. 15 of those 19 do have a fair housing ordinance. I noted the ones that do not. Only the city of Delaware, Brunswick, and Granville do not have a fair housing ordinance. Grove City is considering broader non-discrimination policies at present, and so this is on their horizon, on their radar. Almost all enforcement is administrative with a civil penalty. I did find it interesting that Columbus's ordinance with a criminal consequence was an outlier, so I did find that to be interesting. What I thought would be a really interesting point of discussion for us too was that there was a really nice range of what that administrative process looked like. So it was everything from just send it to the city attorney to figure out what to do with it, to creation of a board. Some communities, actually I think Westerville, after it is referred through their city attorney's office, is actually referred to Columbus's Community Relations Commission. So I thought that was an interesting process as well. Most of these communities, though, again, it's similarly, if they're similarly situated to Gahanna, they don't have that high of a number of complaints. So it's not a burden. So it has not shown yet, and a lot of these are young, but they have not shown yet to be a burdensome process or taxing on resources in the community. I am going to stop sharing. Let me see if I can figure this out. The only other things that I wanted to kind of touch on really quickly was just that Ohio Business Competes has a number of projections about what happens when you either have discriminatory laws on your books, or when you are not welcoming to visitors or to residents. They project that $1 million was the cost to North Carolina economy due to the relocation of the 2017 All-Star Game from Charlotte to New Orleans. And that was related to discriminatory laws that North Carolina was enacting at the time. So there is real economic impact to either putting discriminatory laws on the books, or and the loss of opportunity for not having these types of non-discrimination ordinances in a community. I had a couple other questions that kind of came up from, over the last couple of months. I want to touch a little bit again on landlords' rights, because I think that's a really important piece here. We certainly are looking to ensure the balance between making sure that our landlords and property owners are also adequately protected. At the end of the day, this is a business transaction, and we want to make sure that they are transacting in a fair way that meets their needs, but also meets the basic needs of our residents and our growing population in the region. Some concerns around types of income. Prospective tenants would still have to demonstrate a track record of that income, right? It's not just me telling you that I get child support, or me telling you that I get alimony. There are ways to document that. Those two specific types of income are already used to qualify for mortgages, but there are criteria in order to use that to qualify as mortgages. Similarly, a voucher could allow for tenancy, but only up to that voucher level. It wouldn't qualify a person to exceed rent beyond the value of their voucher. And certainly we want to make sure that landlords can still review eviction history. They still can make sure that the housing unit will fit the need of the homeowners. So certainly balancing the concerns of property owners with the need to ensure that housing is accessible. Ultimately, my goals with this are to show that we are part of this fabric. We're part of an inclusive fabric of Central Ohio, and that we are here and available to make sure that every resident and prospective resident knows that they belong here. Happy to take any other questions. I hope to introduce legislation here in the next month or two, so that will be forthcoming. So, thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Welcome. All right, C, items from the Department of Public Service and Engineering. The first item is Ordinance 21-2022, and there is also a supplemental appropriation on that same contract. You'll be addressing those together?
Yes, I will be.
Okay, and so then ordinance number 22-2022. Thank you.
No problem. Good evening. I'm going to start off with a brief recap. As I'm sure you all remember, in March, Ameriscapes, who was our previous vendor for municipal landscape maintenance, issued a 30-day contract termination. On March 21st, council approved permission to bid the landscape maintenance contract in response to this. On April 15th, 2022, bids were opened and reviewed. The lowest responsive and responsible bidder for this contract was Brightview Landscapes with a bid of $159,136 per year. The contract is our standard term contract, which is a 3-year contract with the option of 2 one-year renewals. So this contract would include the remainder of the 2022 calendar year, as well as 2 full years thereafter, and then the 2 optional 1-year extensions. We do want to note that every bid that was received for the new contract, including Brightviews, was higher than the city's previous contract with Ameriscapes. This is due in part to a handful of factors, from inflation to higher fuel prices, labor shortages, and so on. In addition, Ameriscapes historically has bid significantly lower than all other municipal landscape contractors, to the point that during previous bid processes, these landscape companies have reached out to the city and let us know that they were no longer interested in bidding on these, as they could not compete with Ameriscape's pricing. So we're very happy that, that multiple companies bid this year on this contract. So we are respectfully requesting legislation authorizing the mayor and myself, the Director of Public Service and Engineering, to enter into contract with Brightview Landscapes. Because the 2022 appropriations were set at the previous contract amount, we are requesting a supplemental appropriation of $75,000 so that we can fulfill the remainder of the contract, as well as a small amount of contingency should there be any unforeseen expenses. Since we're entering the landscape season, or the landscape season has begun, I'm sure a few of you mowed your lawn over the weekend or are preparing to, we are requesting a waiver in emergency to get Brightview out there as soon as possible to start maintaining our landscape features throughout the city. Our city crews have been out working very hard, doing as much as they can to keep up with it. Unfortunately, it's not a sustainable operation long term, and it's taking away from our normal operations and our projects. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have tonight.
Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, thank you. I guess just out of curiosity and your expertise, how was Ameriscapes able to do this so cheaply for so long when this supplemental appropriation is a sizable chunk of the original contract?
So I don't have any facts that I can share with you. I certainly have, opinions and some opinions of other contractors out there. It most likely comes down to how they have sourced materials, such as mulch, which I've been told is one of the more expensive pieces with this. We have over 3 acres of mulch, which is a very large amount. And then the other piece is likely associated with labor.
And just related to that, you'd said that you had more bidders this time. So obviously they were made aware that Ameriscapes is no longer bidding. And so other entities are aware that Ameriscapes is no longer.
Correct, they are aware. We did contact a handful of landscape companies to see if they could help us out while we go through the bidding process. So at that time, they were updated on the status of that.
Got it. Thank you. That's all for me, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? I had a question just as to form, and maybe this is a question for the city attorney. I appreciate all of the bid materials that were included here and the entirety of this packet. What I am just curious about is, since we're accepting a bid and I don't see an actual sign on the dotted line contract, would this be an ordinance to accept a bid rather than an ordinance to enter into contract? Or is there?
We will be, when you accept the bid, then we enter into the contract. That comes after the bid's been accepted. Then I compare the contract to make sure that it comports with what has been put into the bid, what they have said they're going to bid.
So
Does that
Does,
answer?
does the bid dictate the terms of what the contract will be?
Yes, yes.
Correct. So it's a matter then of taking the bid and making sure that the contract reflects what is actually in the bid that was accepted.
Exactly. So there will be a contract, but the contract will reflect what was in the bid. look like I'm not answering your question.
No, that does. I'm just, since the contract's not in front of us, or is that's still okay, though, that we can, because we're voting to approve a contract, but we don't have the contract in front of us. We have the bid terms.
Which will be the contract terms. The bid terms are what become the contract terms. So by accepting the bid, you're accepting what the contract terms will be.
Then you're just counting on me to make sure that the contract says what the bid terms are. And then I'm the one who approves the contract when it says, approved by the city attorney. I'm saying that the terms of the contract do meet the terms of the bid.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right, the contract's not here because we haven't accepted the bid yet. So we can't do the contract until we decide which bid we're accepting. And once the bid is accepted, then we can do the contract.
To address the councilwoman's question, I think, given the language of the ordinance, it's to authorize the mayor to enter into a contract with name of company. So the ordinance is authorizing the mayor to go ahead and sign the contract, which is based upon the bid terms that will be then memorialized within a contract, which you review to make sure that the contract is consistent with the bid terms that are approved today. So in essence, council is authorizing me to enter into the contract based upon the bid terms.
Yes, we can only enter into a contract that's based upon the bid terms, and you're authorizing her to do that. Yes, that's correct.
Consent.
Any other questions? It is emergency and waiver. I think it's a regular agenda?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next two items we have for you this evening are our standard quarterly supplementals. The first one is damage to city property. So the city has received funds for the repayment of damage to city property. So we are respectfully requesting to transfer those funds back to their respective expense accounts so that we can use them for their intended operational needs. The second one is water meter fees. Same idea there. We have collected funds for the purchase of water meters. So we are respectfully requesting to transfer those back to the respective expense accounts for our operations.
All right, any questions on ordinances number 23, 2022, or 24, 2022?
No.
All right, are we okay with consent for those two items? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
The next items are two resolutions. We have resolution number 12-2022, a resolution recognizing May as Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Just as by way of introduction, this resolution was included on the schedule that had been discussed in January. The AAPI community is one of the fastest growing ethnic and racial groups in the region, and as we saw from the census, is making up nearly 15% of Ohio's, 53,000 members in the Central Ohio region make up nearly 15% of Ohio's total AAPI population. Is there any further discussion of this resolution? I had hoped that Senator Maharath might join us next Monday, as I believe she's the first Asian American woman serving in the Ohio legislature. So that is forthcoming. I'd ask that it maybe be on regular agenda if Senator Maharath is able to join us.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think actually this is the largest group of people in the entire United States, this particular group, the amount of people we have. So I think it's a really amazing thing. It's truly amazing. And actually one of them won one of the awards that was, I don't recall exactly what the name of it was, but our friend Neil Jurist had won an award at that same place, but this man was the person who had said, this is the biggest one in all of the, I think,
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The next resolution is Resolution 13-2022, a resolution recognizing and honoring small businesses in Gahanna. Councilwoman Padova, would you like to introduce this resolution?
Yes, so, I don't know, Madam Mayor, would you like to kind of discuss this a little bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Trying to do
I'd
like
be
a-
happy to if you'd like,
A
sure.
joint, I don't know if you were able to get any answers in this short period of time.
I just
but-
was picking the brain of the city attorney as you were talking, actually. So the challenge that we have, we talked initially about perhaps finding a procolution, that we could do some kind of combination so that we weren't repeating efforts in doing proclamations and resolutions. The challenge would be, from a procedural standpoint, resolutions are on behalf of the entire body of council, required to be presented at committee of the whole now and then voted upon by council. Whereas a proclamation, I write it and I do it. So then the question is procedurally, what might that look like if we were to do some kind of joint proclamation or whatever we might call it? Would that then need to go through the same procedural process, have all of council, have it be presented to council and voted upon? Or alternatively, could it be, if there's a council member with a particular issue or initiative that they want to represent, the two of us work together, it's presented as a proclamation, which is the best route to go, which is the recommended route to go. So with that, I'm going to turn to our city attorney and allow you to pontificate on your legal opinion.
Well, it's two different things we're trying to make into one, and that's the problem. If it's a resolution that by all of council, council has to vote on it. Now, council may vote it down, and you may decide to go ahead with your own proclamation at that point, I guess. But I would have to say, if council wants it to be part of their resolution, then it has to be voted on by all of council. And so I think that you and a particular member of council should get together, put the language together, present it to council, see if council has any other changes, and then you can decide if you're in agreement with those changes, if you still want to be part of it. If not, you can then have two separate ones. If you are in agreement with what council has said, then council can vote on it, and then you can add your name to it as addition.
That would be that was the next question where I was going. So then, I mean, the resolution is then signed by council, all of council. Do I sign that? Which typically I would not.
Yeah, typically you wouldn't, but if you're trying to do it all together, then I would say, and it should say, this resolution proclamation, or whatever you're going to call it, is by council and the mayor. I mean, because usually the resolution just says by council, and yours says
We're
by
going
the
to make
mayor.
this a word. It's going
And so, yeah.
It's going to be on TikTok. And
Both of you should be in the title, as well as both of you should be on this signatures. That's how I would think.
so then I would pose that back to what is the will of council then, in terms of how you'd like to do that.
And please keep in mind, I'm winging this, trying to figure it out as we go along, because we've never done it before, but that's what makes sense to me to do it that
The
way.
mayor has to do more work.
Yeah.
Just give her the work.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
So I'm not sure if we wanted to do this for Monday, if it's too late to do it for this one, if we need to keep them
Since you
separate
have
for
this on the
this
agenda for
week.
tonight, I would just say move forward with this. I mean,
Okay.
I've done a proclamation for Small Business Week the last 2 years. Whether I do another one, I don't have to necessarily present it. We can just do it and issue it, and you
Okay.
have it presented to council, that's fine. And then going forward, as we perhaps look at the calendar, I believe Councilwoman Bowers earlier in this year had sent me a calendar of projected resolutions for council. I know I have certainly the list of proclamations I've done over the last 2 years, and comparing where there might be some overlap, and then identify those going forward.
Okay. Sounds good. Then as far as the resolution in front of you, if there are any questions or any edits recommended here?
This looks great. Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Do you have a preference whether it's on consent or regular agenda?
No. I don't think so.
Okay. Is there a will of council? Mr. Weaver?
Madam Chair, are we expecting any guests for to receive the resolution for this?
I was kind of trying to figure out if we were doing something together, but TBD on that.
Just, so then I guess I would
Just
say.
keep it on regular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just-
All right. All right. If there is nothing else on tonight's agenda,
If I may.
yes, Mr.
When
City
you had
Attorney.
asked the question, I had looked at all these bid documents before, and so I was trying to pull it together in my mind. And if you will look at the documents, pages 244 and 245 of the 245-page document are the owner-contractor agreement that that I believe you were referring to as to what is the agreement that's going to be entered into by the mayor. It's the very last 2 pages of those 245 pages.
You probably stopped reading at 242.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for identifying that. So that signed contract there, the last 2 pages, we'll just get that back, a copy of that to council to be filed. Okay, so will those 2 items then be
I would have to ask Grant, but my recollection of this is, this incorporates all those previous 243 pages as well.
Okay.
So the entire thing is the exhibit.
Okay.
Is that correct?
He's back.
But yeah, he's correct. Yeah, the final page basically, it agrees to the entire contract. When you sign there, you're saying, I approve everything prior to that.
I'll follow up offline, just so I understand how this packet is assembled.
No
If
problem.
that's all right, okay. Anything else tonight?
Tonight?
All right, then we are adjourned, thank you.
Thank you.